I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
and Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month, we're checking into the continental Osaka to discuss John Wick Chapter 4. We'll also briefly touch on the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which is the biggest hit of 2023 so far. If you like the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating or review on Apple and Spotify, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and now on to the show.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Saying goodbyes?
Saying hello.
You think your wife can hear you?
No.
And why bother?
Maybe I'm wrong.
You're going to die.
Maybe not.
Goodbye to you, my trusted friend.
A new day is dawning. New ideas, new rules, new management.
We've known each other since we were 9 or 10.
Who is this?
The Marquis de Gramont. Challenge him to single combat. Win or lose, it's a way out.
When the first John Wick arrived in theaters in November 2014, Hollywood was starved for good action. Most action scenes in Hollywood blockbusters were full of hazy CGI, haphazard choreography, and an over-reliance on editing rather than stunt work to provide a visceral impact. But John Wick threw out the contemporary playbook and went back to basics. It proved that clever staging and stunt work, and a focus on the craft of action filmmaking, was actually still possible in mainstream American cinema, and could prove to be a hit too. Now, 3 sequels later, the action of John Wick Chapter 4 may no longer have the same visceral novelty of the original film, but it's still a fair order better than the action in most blockbusters. The series might not have changed the form of the action genre as a whole, but it proved that there's an audience desire for choreography and stunt work, and a focus on spatial coherence during action scenes. This latest film in the series follows Keanu Reeves' John Wick to Osaka, Berlin, and Paris, as he tries to escape the bounty placed upon him by the High Table, the ruling order in the series' assassin underworld. The film runs 169 minutes long. That's longer than 2001: A Space Odyssey and Dune. But over 2 hours of the runtime is devoted to action. Wick fights his way through hotels and nightclubs, over the sands of Wadi Rum in Jordan, and most memorably up and down and up the staircase outside the Sacré-Cœur in Paris. The film is as much an endurance test as an action spectacle, but there's no denying the effectiveness of the choreography, the physical appeal of Reeves, and the charismatic presence of Donnie Yen as Kane, an old friend forced to track down and kill Wick. The rest of the film is devoted to face-offs in opulent rooms, such as the mezzanine of the Paris Opera House and the Louvre, where portentous exposition is delivered explaining the film's arcane mythology. 4 films in, I'm not sure anyone cares about the mythology anymore, but the filmmakers don't seem to take the hint. The mythology of the John Wick series, which details the elaborate rules of a criminal underworld, was always meant to be tongue-in-cheek. It was arch and knowing and even a little meta, codifying the rules that seem to dominate crime films. But now it seems more decorative than anything, a holdover that passes the time between the violent action scenes. Luckily, as far as I'm concerned, the film smartly cuts down on mythology, especially compared to the previous 2 films. And most of the focus is on the action choreography and the bonds between the various figures in the series, including Wick, Kane, and others, including Ian McShane's Winston and Hiroyuki Sanada's Koji. But what do you guys think? I know I'm the biggest fan of the series of the 3 of us. I've liked all 4 of the films. But how did John Wick Chapter 4 work for you? Anton, given your reservations about some of the sequels, what did you think?
So I'm actually going to say that I like John Wick 4 the best of the series. That something clicked for me while watching it in a way that didn't in the previous ones. Now, to sort of explain, I liked the first movie quite a bit. The second one, I recall not particularly being interested by. The action was still good, but the story was completely disinterested. I watched the third one a couple nights ago. I thought it was good. I liked the action, but again, I wasn't super into it. And then about halfway through John Wick 4, when they're in Berlin and they're sitting down at a card table opposed to this like giant German gangster guy who's dressed in a purple suit and he has golden teeth. and they're waiting as he's going to sort of play out these cards, I was like, okay, this is like Alice in Wonderland or something. And then as we get into the later levels or scenes in the movie, and he's going up Sacre-Coeur, and all of a sudden we have this duel. I was like, okay, I think maybe John Wick is actually like a morality play too. And I think that on this movie, I don't know if it's just clicked for me or if it's not present in the other ones, but I feel like there's a lot more going on kind of like almost like a symbolic, or there's more layers of meaning to this. And that doesn't mean that like I think the action in this movie is great. I enjoyed it for all that sort of stuff. But I was getting, as I went through this really long viewing, you know, it's almost 3 hours long, but like I started to be like, okay, I think there's actually a lot of stuff going on in this movie. And so I'll be looking forward to chatting about what might that be. I'm curious. I don't know. You, Anders?
I have a similar experience to John Wick. I liked the first one a fair bit. I saw it in theater when it came out. I didn't particularly care for the second one, to the point that I wrote a piece rebutting Aaron's review for the website, where most of my complaint was two things, which I think number 4, it goes a long way to satisfying some of those reservations, but mostly was that it devolves into almost video game-ish qualities at times that I find irritating. And also my just like complete lack of interest in a lot of the sort of the trappings of the series in terms of like, I always say it's not that it's bad. It's more, it's just like too cute by half. If, like, it's like, oh, they got the coin. Oh, did you know that everybody's actually an assassin? As I think Aaron, you mentioned there's we got to have these tatted up radio girls calling out the bounty. Hey, everybody. Hey, cool cats, have you heard John Wick? Is ready to be like, and I'm just like,
they're in the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, it's not enough that they're on the radio. It's not enough that they're on the Eiffel Tower. They also have to be tatted up. They also have to be like pierced. They're all
wearing blouses, like noir femme fatale blouses.
But it's not even that John Wick is in a heightened reality. It's in some alternate reality, right? Like it's a full on like science fictional universe at that point.
I think that's the most clear in the 4th.
Yeah,
where it's totally detached.
And maybe that's why it's okay. But Aaron, you, in your intro, you said here, you're not sure anyone cares that much more at this point in the mythology. And I'm like, does anyone understand the mythology entirely? I'm like, maybe I'm overthinking it. Like you, Anton, I liked 3 a bit better than number 2. I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. But I thought I enjoyed 4 much more. Maybe it was like a case where like the sheer volume is so impressive in terms of the action, but I also really liked the cast in this one. I think Hiroyuki Sanada and Donnie Yen especially they're too cool. I want a whole movie about Kane.
Kane's important in this, like in making I think this movie better.
Yeah, I agree. He's not just the new sort of rival or the old friend. He is like as much a part of the heart of the film, I think, as Wick.
Well, I think one of the key moments in this movie comes early on when it's at the Osaka Continental, which is run by Hiroyuki Sanada's Koji. So he's essentially the Japanese version of Ian McShane's Winston. He's this old friend of Wick with this kind of assumed shared history, and his daughter is the concierge, Akira. And there's this whole kind of sequence where they're talking to each other and they're speaking in third person and talking around the fact that you're like midway through, you're like, oh, that's his daughter. Like it's not this employee.
I'll be having dinner with my daughter tonight, and they don't say
exactly.
You.
And so you get this. There's a bit of a tension and these different layers of roles, right? That it puts this idea in your mind that like these are people who wear different roles depending on the situation, but they're always beholden to rules. And she kind of warns him as being like, Wick's not worth it. He just burns down everything he touches. He's kind of, he's cursed. So we're going to lose everything we have if you protect Wick. Little does she know that John's already up on the roof. He's already hiding there. Koji's already made the agreement. And when she finds this out, Koji explains that like something's only worth it if you can lose everything. Like the loyalty is only valuable if it comes with a cost. Otherwise, it's not real friendship, it's not real loyalty, and it's not real bond. And it's one of those points that in a lot of movies, it would bring up something like that, but it would drop it. And this movie goes back to that point again and again, specifically through the reflection on the characters who die in the film, like Koji, like Lance Reddick's Sharon,
which has an added dimension given that he just passed away.
Yeah. And Ian McShane kind of speaks to this stuff, this idea of loss. And it's like, there's the whole scene at Sharon's gravestone in New York. And it's like, what do you want on your gravestone? And all this talk of legacy. And Donnie Yen's character is this, constantly pulled back and forth. He's doing all this stuff to protect his daughter. And the fact that every time he pops up in the film, it's like a dialogue within the action scenes, like literally within the action scenes happening where he's fighting parallel or sometimes is fighting John. Yep. And it constantly comes up as like, who are you more loyal to? What's the cost here? What is this all going to? And I feel like it builds these stakes because it actually puts so much into the character of Kane that it allows us to have a through line where he's not like a supporting character here. He gets the other like parallel arc of John. Yep. And it allows us to understand these bonds of something deeper than just something that an action movie gestures at, which maybe clarifies, Anton. I don't know. You can jump in here, but does it clarify why this one might have played better for you in the sense of it's almost mythical, classical, ancient Greek, like Sisyphean, like the John Wick movies in my mind are about a man who has gotten out of the underworld, literally. Like he's left the criminal underworld and he goes back through like for revenge and rage and he essentially damns himself. And it's a journey through hell, the 4 movies.
It's like an Orpheus myth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
he's going back, he's going back to get his wife in a sense, but he can never get her back. So all he's doing is working out his grief at her loss and just killing everyone. Right? He's bringing everyone to hell with them.
Yeah. So I totally agree that I think that this 4th one, I think all of the movies are playing with certain mythic elements, but this is the one that fully like it really leans into that and commits to it. And I actually think that means like that, like this movie, it's telling like a basic story level, but then it definitely has kind of like a symbolic mythic level to it all. And it's there in the way that the film is just structured, but then also the way it leans into like highly symbolic settings and constructions. Like the very fact that you have them go up the steps, like we can talk about what that means, and that you end with a duel, but not like a fight where you can leap around and use all your cool moves. It's just we're gonna fire at each other in the old-fashioned duel way. But I also think it's a series called John Wick, right? So we have this character, John Wick. And in the first movie and in all the other movies, John Wick is the most famous assassin in this story world. Everyone knows John Wick. They're like, John Wick. Oh, John Wick, John Wick.
He once was an associate of ours. We called him Baba Yaga.
The boogeyman?
Well, John wasn't exactly the boogeyman. He was the one you sent to kill the fucking boogeyman. Oh, John is a man of focus, commitment, sheer will. Something you know very little about.
By the 4th movie, we finally really feel that legend within the film. In the first one, it's just right. The movie has to sell this idea that John Wick is so special and he has this legendary status. But by this 4th movie, like it doesn't even have to hint that. We just know John Wick is now, and Keanu Reeves' John Wick is just like this legendary character. So I feel like that just works better. It also doesn't have those sort of Anders, I think you called them like, these sort of too cute moments. It had less sort of like, there's a few moments of sort of like mean-spirited humor still, well, like the dog pissing on the guy. But it leans less into that and is more interested in, I always thought in the first movie, it has a basic crime arc of like, I wanted to get out. And then my beloved is killed and then I'm drawn back into the world, right? Like that's so many crime movies.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Huh? Zappuccino.
Where this 4th one's almost barely a crime movie. And now I actually think it's a compendium of American action film, including American action films' interests in certain foreign action forms, whether it's Hong Kong, Japanese, etc. But in the fact that it starts with this, we're in the desert, but then it's also like a Western because he's riding horse. They're not on camels. He's riding a horse. He's shooting handguns while riding on that horse. Like it's drawing on so many elements of American action films, Euro thrillers, not European action films, but specifically the American conception of like this Euro thriller, driving fast cars and stuff.
Berlin nightclubs, seedy
Berlin
underbelly.
nightclubs, Paris, yeah.
All
Scott
Europeans
Adkins in
are
a fat
kind of
suit.
sickos.
But Aaron, the other thing I just wanted to say, Aaron, was that for me it also like the characters have the most impact and the most depth because it's less about like I want revenge because they killed my dog or like things like this, and it's more like no, like it turns to I guess fraternal bonds, but also just relational bonds, and it's less just actually motivated by revenge. I thought it was really interesting that the Osaka manager's daughter at one point says, to Kane, she's like, I'm going to, I'll get revenge on you. And the movie consciously sets that away. And I understand that probably they'll save that for maybe a future installment.
It's the post-credit scene.
I didn't even know there was a post-credit
It's
scene.
her showing up in Paris and Kane's there. And it's like, okay, this is what you're getting next.
Okay. But like, so it's doing, like a Marvel tease of like more stuff. But the movie's less interested in revenge as the driving force, and it starts to turn to say like, is there other meaning for John Wick? And because circling back to my whole comment of like, who is John Wick? I think this is a movie that then asks like, who is John Wick? And people are always asking John, what's in this for you? Like, what's your end goal here? And so I actually think it becomes kind of almost this like existential fable of like, how do you create meaning in your life? And at this stage, it's like John Wick's not just motivated by revenge. It starts to be things like, on his gravestone where he's like, loving husband. And what does Winston put on Sharon's tombstone? He puts friend. And all of a sudden it starts to define people by like their relationship with other people. And it starts to say that there's value in that. And then there's value in purpose in action, literally in action, like how you enact yourself. Like, and I think so it turns like the very form of like action cinema into kind of like a meaning creation.
Okay, so just jumping off that, like if we're going to view, so I agree with that reading, but I also would say that I think it might hit further, not just because of the other characters deliberately bringing up these relational meanings. I think it also is the fact that this is clearly set up as a climax, as a fourth film. It's the return. Like he has had his revenge. It's no longer about it's trying to like, what is the end game here? It's like, where are you leading?
Yeah.
What is the point of all this? Like, why do we watch action cinema? Can the revenge ever be satisfied in these things, or is it just lead to nothing? Right? These are kind of the questions it's asking. But then the actual manner in which it explores this stuff is through these ridiculous action set pieces that are like enormous in scale. Some of them, to the point of the whole, I would say, scale-wise, the roundabout scene at the Arc de Triomphe is like, it's like Frogger. It's like Deadly Frogger, where he's like fighting through traffic, all the guys, and I swear there's like hundreds of cars and hundreds of stuntmen working in the scene.
That's a sequence where you cannot understand this as in any sense a real world, because people wouldn't just keep driving their cars around the roundabout when there's like guys doing a shootout. They just like stop. But because it has to just keep doing that. That's why I felt like there was this. It actually leans into like the absurdity of the scenarios and starts to make them like I did feel like there was this weird sort of like Alice in Wonderland type aspect where it's like what is going on here? Where like so many cars are zooming around and you're going to get hit and you kind of have to like jump over them.
So it's a bit of a like the mock turtles race.
Yeah.
Alice in Wonderland, that you feel compelled to do this thing. It's like, what do you how do you win? It's like, I don't know. It's like, we just got to keep going round and round and round.
Backward, forward, upward, inward, bottom to the top. Never a beginning, there can never be a stop.
So Anton, your reading is quite compelling to me. I think it helps me get it. Part of the reason I liked John Wick 4 a lot more than the others, I haven't watched the first in a long time, but I like the first. But those things that I think the dangers for me, if I can be push back a little bit, is that when we tend to that level of abstraction, I think it works for me better in different forms of art, perhaps, than cinema always, because that it ends up feeling kind of like maybe I've used the term video game-ish honestly a lot, right? And like like they're NPCs, the other people in the city.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
They're just going through their motions. They don't have any free will of their own. They're there purely as a backdrop to the real drama, which takes place among this assassins sort of culture and league, right? And to me, that I think there's a place in like Greek myth and even comic books, like not comic movies, but comic books to some extent can deal with that kind of like abstract symbolism. And I think the film gets pretty close to that. Like I like this film quite a bit. I don't, but to me, that is like the sort of one reservation I have about them, is that they do feel kind of like maybe not sanitized, but like formalistic, not in like the way that they embrace their genre, but formalistic in the like pro forma. Like these things have to happen. I mean, I've commented even a number of times. Like there's after a certain number of times of John Wick doing a jujitsu takedown shot to the head of a person, it's like it's impressive, but it's like it becomes like repetitive and numbing. Right now, the big contrast I would give John Wick, and that clarify for me how it stands out, is compared with I believe Stahelski is it David Leitch? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Who directed Bullet Train and the film that I really hated, which was Atomic Blonde, is a film that on a superficial level, I think has a lot of similarities to John Wick, but to me embodies it leans too strongly into all those abstractions, and to me they're not just symbolic or archetypal, but they rather become generic and cliched and empty in a way. But I think John Wick 4 manages to avoid that for a lot of the reasons that you say. So I liked it.
I sort of think though that like I agree that there is. And I think the runtime of this movie, for me, I was going into it actually like worried about like, why is this movie so long? And like, but when I was hearing these raves, and for me, the length of the movie actually like accentuates the sort of the formalism of the action scenes, and they do get repetitive, but for me, like it was repetitive the way that like watching a dance is.
That's a good point.
And I started to detach myself from like watching this almost as like action, and you just see like shapes and bodies like moving around in these same repeated things. And you notice that at some point he's going to throw a gun into the other person, and then you'll swing one way and then you swing with the other. And it really became like, I was like, the choreography was exceptional, but I also think these aspects are accentuated by maybe watching two John Wicks close together. And I can't say if this is more so in the fourth, but the attention to like the mise en scène in each shot, like in each setting, is so intense that it's like it's clearly they're going for something, or I don't maybe they're not conscious of this, but you're like they're going for something that's beyond just like, they're so far beyond realism here. Like the way you're lighting every single scene is like, this will have a template of like, this will be a green, red lighting setup. Okay, now we're having a blue and black, and like things are so like formally stylized that way. And I'm trying to figure out like what to make of it, because you're like, it just felt like for whatever reason, this fourth one started to click, that like, it felt like this was beyond doing something more than just kind of like style and like flash, that it seemed to be trying to get at something. And like, I noticed, when you get into like the Berlin club scene, it literally puts, the fight in the midst of a rave dance, which I think calls attention to the whole idea of like, what is this sort of choreographed action? Can we think of this as like a human form of dance, like just an alternative form of it? But then it also has interesting nods back to like, the Matrix movies, where it's like we see Keanu Reeves fighting guys in the rain, and I'm thinking of Matrix Revolutions. We're thinking of rave scenes like for the Wachowskis, like. So it starts to then like it's like a ball that keeps getting like all these different action genres like stuck onto it. Like think about the opening. It opens with I don't know if we call it like it's an allusion to to Lawrence of Arabia, right? We get
it's literally the same spot as Wadi Rum.
Yeah, and you get the match cut. And I will say, for a movie that it's almost 3 hours, they should have just held the sun rising fully. They had to cut a little bit further along into like the sun rising, and you're like, no, like you guys are taking your sweet time and everything. We could have just seen the whole sunrise, but then like so you're like, oh, so like we're getting this like desert adventure, And then all of a sudden you see like John Wick racing on a horse, firing like his guns. You're like, okay, this is also like a Western. And he just keeps doing this in every scene.
I think you have to view the action scenes as dance, honestly. I would say dance beyond, like, not just dance, like ballet specifically.
And you have,
because the whole point,
the Ruska Roma, like always doing the ballet. So there's that also connection within the films.
Yeah, but it's the key is that in ballet, it's not, I'm not an expert of ballet or anything, but in ballet, there's never any question as to like, why are these characters dancing?
Yes.
They dance. That is their purpose. That is their aesthetic expression of the story. This is how we're going to understand all these emotional conflicts between them through these set confines and these rules of the dance. And within that, because the very presentation of it is not bound by these rules of the real world, it's bound by the rules of the specific form, it now allows you to play with notions of like, okay, you're going to add meaning through light, and you're going to add meaning through how close do they become to you, and what are their costumes, and how close do they get to each other when they fight. And it's this idea of implied intimacy between the people who are dancing or fighting together, but also between how you witness the dance, right? And it's all these things where sometimes people will be like, well, don't you think the scenes just go on too long? Like, it's not justified, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, part of the thing that I think is kind of brilliant about the John Wick series is that it actually boils down the whole purpose of these types of American action movies is the action. And it's the thing that I think excuses some of the archness of the mythology, is that it sets up a non-realistic arch world, story world, that allows you to believe the unreality of the situations that they find themselves in and not doubt it, because it's set up these rules that it's like, well, that's why they do this, that's why they do that, blah, 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 blah. This isn't our world.
Yeah.
And just taking the scenes on a like a very basic, pure, formal level, like it's actually kind of, I almost feel like they did themselves a disservice by making 4 of them, because people now think it's like easy to make an action scene as good as the action scenes in these movies. Like if you just take the raid on the Osaka Continental,
which lasts about how long? Like half an hour?
It's like 25 minutes, yeah. And it the layers of escalation within the scene, but not just escalation, it's like tension. Like, stuff's going down, and Koji walks through there and he's getting his guys, and you see the sumo wrestlers and you see the archers, and it's like, okay, we got to get some things to bring our guests, and they're grabbing like the katanas off the like in the kitchen and stuff. And then you have the sword fight. Okay, you're going to go up the stairs, and there's this fight up there, and then there's the whole art installation. And it's just the way that, like, think about it. We walk through the entire space with Koji and Akira. We understand the geography of the entire hotel. He walks us up the staircase. He walks us through the art installation, into the back room, through the kitchen, into the other amphitheater, then goes up there, and there's the secret balcony. And then the fight starts, and the fight moves us all the way back through. So we know every single spot. We know what actually obstacles there's going to be. We know that where the exit is. It's the kind of filmmaking that we almost take it for granted, because the film is doing something that so many other movies don't do. They have no interest in setting up of like, oh, I understand the space. I understand the objects in the space, and I understand how we can use the space to kill the other guys and to get out. Yeah. And like, it almost makes me want to say that John Wick movies are maybe the only action movies, and the other movies we call action aren't actually action movies.
I know, in action in the sense of like the narrative is subordinate to the action, but not in like a pejorative sense.
It's not like the story turns off when you have an action scene.
Right. They're not, if you want to go by the whole idea of what is Tom Gunning's famous thing? What is it? Cinema of attraction.
Yes,
right?
cinema of attraction.
So you have narrative that is, but he argues that is actually the purest form of cinema then. So maybe I bet Tom Gunning must like John Wick, because it's like a return to this idea of like, the attraction of action and movement and seeing this thing on screen is not subordinated to narrative. It actually predates the narrative in a certain sense.
You know what Stahelski loves? Okay, like just the only thing one
Buster Keaton.
Stahelski, he constantly talks about silent film. Like constantly. That is the way that he frames basically every action scene. And he's like, silent films have this kind of implied relationship to the camera and the way that scenes are staged that you don't think about it. There's no discussion of reality. There's no discussion of the staging and the aestheticism or the formalism of it. It's all just built into it. And it's actually becomes more like subconscious and more immediate. And so he's constantly thinking of like, well, I'm going to stage it in these ways that almost old silent films would do it, because it gets into that part of the brain where now you take it as a movie reality.
So okay, I have two thoughts about that. One was that we've all made a few references to the video game aspect of this movie. Aaron, you talked about how it lays out the geography the way that you start to you get to used to like a 3D level in a video game, and then it allows you to play in it. But we're passive, we're not active, right? We're watching like John do the stuff. But so what are video games? And like I've been thinking about, I finished up The Last of Us. Aaron and I are working on Roundtable, but we're talking about like what is a video game primarily doing? Like I think it is an art form, but on some level, like they're narrative, but that's not the primary level. And there seems to be something about like the way that John Wick does certain physical actions, certain tackles, things like that. They remind me very much of different shooter games or whatever, where you have like certain moves. Like if I hit my B or my C, he'll do like a little roll spin or like different little actions. And we know that you have these different combos that you can use in different ways. But there seems to be like they actually gain significance by seeing the repetition of that action like performed out. And so that seems to be the way it like one level where it's like doing something, not just telling a story, but actually like the repetition of the action. The other question I have then is like this, I didn't realize he was Stahelski was interested in silent film, because watching this one, I was finding like, oh, you know what? John Wick must be referencing M for its portrayal of the criminal underworld. So in M, if you haven't seen it, any listeners, it's famous early sound film, but still largely like about half the movie's kind of silent. Uses some early is 1930, Anders?
31.
Yeah, so it's Fritz Lang. It's about a child killer in Berlin, and things are getting so bad that the criminal bosses in Berlin decide that they're going to have to take matters into their own hands and try and hunt down this child killer played by Peter Lorre. And we even get beggars who are employed to, the beggars run the street, and it's all this like they're controlling it. I'm thinking of the Bowery King, and the high table, and you get a point in M where all the big crime bosses have a big table that they actually sit around and they decide stuff. And so I was like, oh, like maybe he is. And if he's into movies from that time, like it gives a bit of a reference point that, I think it's drawing on some of this sort of like Fritz Lang stuff too. I don't know what to make of it entirely. I still don't entirely love the mythology. The last point I'll say is that, and this is something I'm working on an essay for the site on John Wick 4, but there's something about the way that this film approaches the highly elaborate, stifling rules of this world and seeks to liberate John from them. And what does he have to do? He has to go to the Sacred Heart. He has to climb up these stairs. And then eventually he's going to have to sacrifice himself in order to, essentially that's his out, his sacrifice for another person.
For his friend.
It actually is sacrificial for everybody.
And it becomes sacrificial for everyone. And then I was like, oh, so we're almost getting this like portrayal of like, it's essentially an act of grace resolves things in John Wick 4.
Yeah,
John Wick's act of grace.
So what John Wick 4 finally settles is that Keanu Reeves is Jesus.
But he kills a lot of people.
Yeah. And I was like, the way it builds up
but remember, this is hell, so he's just killing demons.
This is the
scouring of hell.
Yeah.
But we have this, we have this rules-based system where it's all about merit and what you owe to each other. And it's like caricatures of like the medieval, church, where it's just like all these different elaborate forms of appeasement that have to be met. And then somehow like,
how do you get out of purgatory? Yeah. How do you get to the next stage? It's like Dante's Inferno and like you're moving through the levels.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so. That's something I'm going to try and explore more. But so I even feel like the film itself is trying to almost like on a narrative level, trying to be like, well, how does John Wick get out of this? But it seeks to almost be like, okay, like how do you actually get out of the cycle of revenge that consumes all of these action films? And it does. I think it ultimately, as you said, Aaron, it says that it's like the only way out is someone actually has to bite the bullet, right? Like,
you have to pay the price. But like, I think the movie does gesture at all this stuff. I don't want to overstate it to the point of being like it says everything very profoundly or that every scene works and whatnot. I do think that there are clear action scenes in this film that are exceptional. Other ones that I don't think about that much. And say one like the overhead shot scene through the apartment where he's got the incendiary rounds where
so many. How can you have that many incendiary rounds on a?
Yeah, that is where it turns into like a true video game. But I in the theater was like chuckling, like I was just loving the fact that it's like, oh, now he has the power to like light his enemies on fire.
John Wick,
just witnessing him
with a fire
like,
flower.
You are, like, no, but that's the thing. It's like, or it's like I banish you to hell. And he's just blasting these guys with flame, and they're like going back to the pit. It's just like that scene. I like going the whole overhead shot, the Minority Report Spielberg style use of an apartment building, but I don't think it is as good as say the Osaka fight. Just because Koji is built up as such a good character, he gets his nice little mini arc of the cost. I think the Berlin club sequence is great, partially because Scott Adkins is the funniest part in all these movies. I think it's where the humor actually works.
Yeah, he's so goofy.
I don't think the humor often works. No, it works, but it's also having Scott Adkins, who, if people don't know, is this very renowned American action star for like direct-to-video stuff. And he's like an exceptional martial artist. He actually plays opposite Donnie Yen in 8 Man 4. He's like the villain in it. Having him in the fat suit, it puts the audience at a like, you expect him to be this gross, disgusting, monstrous villain.
But he can fight.
You don't expect him to kick his ass like when it actually starts fighting. Like the whole where it pulls back to the shot of him doing the roundhouse and kicking him off the thing, and I could tell everybody in the audience was like, "Whoa!" Like, okay, this guy's actually going to fight, but he's got that weight behind him, so he's actually like deadly because he's so big. I like that sequence, and then the whole stair fight sums up the whole movie. You almost don't need any of the rest of the movie. You just need this fight up the stairs, down the stairs,
back up,
and then the duel.
I know that's the sort of thing where, like, you know, in Aaron, your review does a great job of starting with that scene because it's key to it all. And I think that like that to me is the most like, I'm glad that they had the guts to just we're gonna make him go up. We're gonna make you watch him go all the way down, and we're gonna do it one more time. This time with Kane. And to just actually stick to that, because by doing it all, I actually think it has a lot more meaning than if you just tried to sort of like to fudge it, or if he just gets up in there and won. Like,
what did you think of like Donnie Yen is probably the best addition to the series, but now
he was really good.
But do you think that like in a way almost this becomes the Kane movie?
I think it's more of a foil. So it's like Wick's better because we have Kane, and I will say that I always thought that I like the fact that it's sort of like a frenemy, like it's like we were friends, now we're enemies, like so it's sort of a classic action movie thing. But it makes Kane so good that we're like, oh, could like Kane could actually kill Wick, because basically we haven't really feared. It's always more a question of like how much pain can Wick take, but we assume he'll prevail. And so I think by making Kane like, and also casting Kane as like a huge action star, right? Like Donnie Yen, it gives the sense that you're like, oh, like this is actually someone who could potentially kill John Wick, because you have like that kind of like star behind it.
I find it very funny that he's playing a blind character just like he did in Rogue One.
Who sort of like operates off of like Sixth Sense, like
no, but he uses the sound
exactly
like
when he taps those
hilarious.
little like things that he put, and then his cane that
his physical performance is great, because the way he did his like him going slow and then fast, you know, like when he's sort of like
and he's kind of stumbling around
and
sometimes.
Then and then he's almost falling into stuff, but then other times like when he shoots, like he actually did a great like. That would be really hard to try to convey, like directionally I'm trying to shoot, because like what you notice that he's not just like firing around randomly.
No.
He's very precise, but his body, right? Like Donnie Yen can control his body so well that he can actually like convey that. It doesn't get just like lost in the camera work. You can tell like what Kane's trying to do.
What I would say is that this film gains for having both Yen and Reeves in those roles. I think they elevate the movie. I think that it's an example of they both have a star power to them, but it's kind of an unusual sort of star power, but they're movie stars in a real way that elevates those roles. I really appreciate, you know, that Keanu has like sort of gained a sort of, I won't say a new respect, but like a reiterated how special he is in his unique way. And also Donnie Yen, you know, reminding, you know, American audiences who maybe haven't seen all his films what he is capable of as a action star, right? And action stars today, I like the fact that they're not in like a franchise here, in the sense that, well, they are obviously John Wick's like, you know, 4-film franchise, and
But it only exists.
But it only
as the
exists
movies.
because of Keanu Reeves, right?
Yeah.
The logic works the other way around. They built the franchise around him rather than inserting him into a pre-existing IP. So I think that is important.
So it's a more classical, actually, franchise.
However much the Russo brothers might constantly, with their stupid Russo brothers pizza film school crap, might be talking about we're living in a post-movie star world, which is absurd considering partially that like they are Marvel directors working these big movie stars, and it's like you can't be reflecting on a trend that you set. Like you forced this as a trend in the movies you made, which crowded out the other movies. But it's also like you guys constantly want to be making John Wick stuff with they're like side projects.
They want to be John Wick, yeah.
They want to be John Wick, and it's like the John Wick movies are they're a star vehicle. They're one of the few the only true movie star in Hollywood is Tom Cruise in the sense of like he transcends any possible brand that he's involved with. But the John Wick movies are a perfect example of Keanu Reeves' star power. These movies are all about his specific physical allure as a action star. And these movies have gone increasingly popular to the point where the fourth one is the most popular.
So, is the poster for the fourth? Yeah. Is the poster for the fourth one not just Keanu?
Just his face. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in the corner it maybe says John Wick, but it doesn't even say it doesn't say Keanu Reeves, and it doesn't really give much information. And it actually was like because people will be like now, oh, like Keanu, John Wick, like that just conveys what you're talking about in terms of the star power.
People keep asking if I'm back, and I haven't really had an answer. But now, I'm thinking I'm back.
I would say that Keanu's special star power is weirdly, in a way, not dissimilar in some ways from Cruise. There is also a kind of respect for their craftsmanship, and there's a sort of integrity. There's an integrity to their performances, a holistic integrity, not just in terms of their dialogue and things like that. That's not what you're there for. You're there for the whole person, the body,
and the commitment to the production,
and the commitment to the production. Exactly. Yeah.
Like you can tell he's like I think maybe Reeves was like they had a different name for the series, like what his name wasn't John Wick.
Yeah, it was a different.
Yeah, and then I don't know if it was Reeves and someone else, but they were like he was like we can't use that. We need a different name to be like the character. Because it's a good name, like it just sort of sticks in your mind.
What I think the first movie was named something else, and then he's like, "Well, we'll just name it."
Oh yeah, we'll call it the character. Yeah.
The other thing I would say that Cruise and Reeves have in common is they don't condescend to the genre ever. They don't. It's this true idea that you are paying to see a movie, and I want to give you a show, and I'm going to put the work in to make sure that like I'm living up to my bargain. And if you're going to pay money to see it, you're living up to your bargain.
It's interesting how they because I agree that there's a lot of commonalities, but their like screen presence is, even though they're both actually very physical actors, and you've talked about doing the stunts and stuff. Like Cruise is always like he's electricity,
and
there's something
you can't contain him, hold him still, right?
Yeah, and he has he exudes out this energy, right? Whereas Keanu Reeves. Partly because from
Zen.
Yeah, you're right. He and he just sort of like he's great.
He's literally Buddhist.
Yeah, but he's great for Wick because it's you always and he leans into that now with how many actually lines of dialogue does he have? And then we know there'll be a couple of moments where we have an understated line towards the camera, just sort of oh yeah, I think so.
I'm gonna need a gun.
Yeah, exactly.
He says it so slowly.
The one last thing I would say about the film is very interesting. Is I've appreciated what you guys have said about this stuff. Donnie Yen's character is Kane, which is obviously named after Kane from Kung Fu, the television series, who David Carradine played in the television show, who was Bill in Tarantino's Kill Bill. The series that I felt compelled to revisit after watching John Wick 4 was the two Kill Bill films, which I hadn't watched in well over maybe a decade. They also do have a similar rumination on the nature of revenge and the sort of never-ending. How do we end this? How do you satisfy these kind of things? How do you give someone back something that you've taken away from them that you can never repay? These kind of questions that I think they're very different in terms of actually their cinematic antecedents. Even if Tarantino also draws on Hong Kong and Japanese cinema. You have the Street Fighter, Hattori Hanzo. You have obviously Pai Mei, the Kung Fu master, and drawing on things like the Jackie Chan, Fearless Hyena, and Drunken Master, and things like that. But there is Tarantino, because of he's ultimately, like, I mean, the action scenes in those films are pretty great. They're different than John Wick, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though he has young Wu Ping coming to help him with that, the focus is never ultimately on the action. The focus is ultimately on the dialogue, and Tarantino's love of, essentially, like, they're actually very, like, small films in a way, which is kind of interesting in a lot of ways too. And there's a kind of, they still feel like movie world, but they feel like, all the grindhouse films of the 70s and 60s, but done in a different kind of way. So they're very different films, actually, ultimately, in terms of what their references are.
Are the characters more psychologically real, even though they're in kind of this movie world? What do you think? Like, how do you? They definitely. They're like, you know what I mean? They are, because you actually, like, feel it a lot. The bride's arc.
Yeah,
and, like, what she goes through,
Uma
and then,
Thurman's
like, the child and all that.
Not take nothing away from what Keanu does, but her performance is very different. It's
very different, for sure. Yeah, it's not trying, like, John Wick is clearly not trying to make us be affected through our emotional relationship with the character, or putting ourselves in the emotional space of the character.
Right. Now, and it's interesting that John Wick begins with the dissolution of a family unit.
Yeah.
And Kill Bill ends with the dissolution, reuniting of a family unit. So it's very much more focused on the mother daughter relationship and those kind of questions. And anyway, I was glad that John Wick got me to go back and revisit those, because you know what, they hold up, and they feel like movies made 100 years ago. At this point, they feel so different from the way movies are made today. That, on sets with, like, lighting, Tarantino lights The Bride like Joseph von Sternberg lights Marlene Dietrich. That's, like, that's what they're going for there. But John Wick, you've convinced me, though, that as much as I sort of bristle at some of the mythology and stuff, that there might be a purpose to the abstraction and the way that it approaches its world building.
So, you want to kill him? You want to kill him? I want to kill him. What about you, Mr. Wick?
I'm going to kill you.
Oh, for better, of course, yeah. But it looks like we have ourselves a genuine conundrum. A quandary, if you will. A real-life dilemma. So, I thought we'd play a game. One hand. The winner decides who lives and who does not.
So we've kind of commented that the John Wick series has become increasingly beholden to video game logic as the series progresses. For example, the watching John from above fight his way through the apartment building of assassins. It's kind of like watching another gamer move through a level in a third-person shooter, right? The whole act of watching the film seems like you're watching a video game. Now, so I want to turn our attention to an actual video game adaptation.
My army! Koopas! Goombas! Whatever those things are! Aww. We will destroy the Mushroom Kingdom!
Bowser is coming.
I'm not afraid. I'll do anything for my brother.
We're going to save him.
Yes! Fire!
And I'm curious, because watching the Super Mario Bros. Movie, I think part of the desire on the filmmaker's part, even it's a kid's film, is to try to replicate the feel and the iconography of the series, whether it's the Mario Kart games or the Super Mario games. And so this animated adaptation of the iconic Nintendo video game series, watching it, I can't quite tell whether this movie's actually trying to replicate that, or it's simply an animated movie with all the designs, characters, levels resembling the game without actually getting at what the core appeal of the game is. So we all saw this together over Easter weekend. We had the kids in tow. I feel like based off all their reactions, it's really clear that this movie is targeted to children. It seems to really work well for them, both the humor and the brightness and the energy of it. I'm not sure it's something that's going to stay in their brain forever, but it seemed to really satisfy them in the moment. But does it actually work as a movie, or is it just kind of a product extension of the Mario universe? Is it just another piece of IP? I don't want to go like too deep on this, but I'm just curious general thoughts because we didn't really get into it after the movie. So Anders, did you like the Super Mario Bros. Movie?
I can't not enjoy it on a certain level because as you say, the iconography is such a strong part of even my childhood, going back to NES and even the opening scene with like original Super Mario Brothers and the Nintendo logo and all the little references to all the various games, even up to Mario Odyssey. Right? I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's actually much different or better than most of the animated movies that I've seen in the last few years. Like what works really well in the movie is that they smartly didn't visually update the characters. They essentially look like the Pixar or Illumination version of what you would get in the video game. And that's good. But I think ultimately I'm not sure that having Mario and Luigi be voiced by Chris Pratt and Charlie Day works as well as some of the other characters gaining celebrity voices, because ultimately in Super Mario Brothers games, you're Mario. And if to capture the feeling of the game, it's like once you introduce another personality and a backstory about, their life in Brooklyn and the relationship with the dad and stuff like that, I'm just like, I don't know. It kind of like loses the feel of the game for me in a certain way. I did enjoy Jack Black's Bowser, partly because Bowser's always a kind of outrageous, ridiculous character. And it kind of plays into some of the campier elements, even from some of the last games with like his wedding stuff, right, from Odyssey and all that. So does it work as a movie? I'm not sure. I'm like, maybe can I say that I kind of enjoyed the movie, but at the same time, I'm not sure that it is anything more than an extension of Nintendo's IP into, what passes for children's 3D animation nowadays. Is that too harsh? I don't know.
No, I don't
think it's harsh. They obviously did the old movie, which is a weird abomination, but they also had the Super Mario Bros. TV show. Remember in the 90s,
cartoon,
which seems very much like this, where it was just basically the animation stuff from like Super Mario 2 and 3.
I don't actively dislike the movie because there's enough about it that I enjoyed, but I do feel like when Aaron, I guess the questions you set up of sort of being, does this work as Mario, like conveying the feel and the play of like a Mario game, or is this just sort of a children's entertainment? I actually think that the movie is only partially successful at duplicating what I remember and still enjoy about playing in those games. So I appreciated that the movie invests in having like a Mario Kart race scene. And we'll forget whether this makes any sense to have characters riding around in little carts and stuff, but we'll do that. And then we'll have characters jumping around on blocks, and sometimes we'll go to a side panel sort of scroller to see something happen. What I actually really didn't like was giving too much backstory to Mario and Luigi, them in Brooklyn, plumbers, having a really, really weak, like trying to tag on like some glib meaning to the movie of sort of like, I always just feel beaten down, like no one understands me, or like you're just like, we didn't need that. Like no one needs the hook. None of the kids need the hook. They're there for Mario.
It's obligatory.
It's obligatory in these children's entertainments, but it's something, and I shouldn't actually punish this movie for doing it because it's a larger trend that's bad, but they just shouldn't have it, and they don't need it. I don't know why they
just
think
do pure sugar at this point. Let's admit, and it goes back.
But it doesn't
to
even
Aaron's
have to
comment.
be pure sugar.
No, yeah, but to go back to Aaron's comment, it's like I can't really hold it against the movie because like I don't think I like Super Mario Brothers. It's been a part of my whole childhood and even adulthood, and my kids love it too, but like it's not sacred. It's like it was already like you said, there was already a cartoon, there was already the Bob Hoskins movie, it's already marketed into like candies and a million things. Like there was nothing ever to be perverted in any kind of way.
It's not a purist complaint. My concern is that the movie doesn't. Okay, I found the whole movie to be overly glib. And I actually didn't really like Jack Black's Bowser because I kind of tire of kids' movies where it just turns everything into ha-ha. Like, let's kind of be like, make fun of everything. And what I actually, playing some of the early Mario games, what I just felt like the movie lacks is like, so one of the pleasures, we've talked about the pleasure of sort of repetitive action in video games. One of the other great strengths of video games, and yes, to a lesser extent in Mario, but it's still there in, say, Mario World, atmosphere. Creating a sense of feeling and being in a certain space, even if it's a side scroller. Sometimes there'd be certain levels you're like, I just sort of like being in this level, and I like the way it looks. And this movie's so fast and so quick, dancing around everything, and it never takes much time to let us inhabit any of this space. And I actually think
that's a filmmaking complaint.
And I think what Aaron's comment, like I think my boys like. During watching it, I think they were having a huge blast. Like they were like loving it. They're like shouting at the screen. I don't know if my one son, like I couldn't tell if afterwards if he thought like Bowser was too funny because he like always thought Bowser was kind of like scary because they're quite young. But then the other thing was that I was like, I actually haven't heard them like, they were so excited for this movie and they talked about it nonstop for like weeks and maybe even like months, and they would watch the trailer, and this was one of their first movies like being built up. And after it, they've talked about how fun it was to go see it with everyone, but they actually haven't talked about the movie that much. And so I actually do feel like it's kind of like, it has it's pleasurable, but it has a really short afterlife.
No, I think that kind of sums it up, really. I didn't expect this movie to be anything special. I'm actually satisfied with it as it's presented, in the sense that it's the like, the cookie cutter children's film that we get from Illumination, from Disney, from DreamWorks. The story's not any worse than any of those others.
Yeah.
I like the iconography of Mario much better than Minions and stuff. So I'm much more happy to watch a movie that's got the Mario music, and it's got the power-ups, and it's got jumping on heads and Mario Kart and all this, that, and the other.
I really appreciate that as both of you have said, that the movie looks like Mario, that they didn't try and change it, like what Mario looks like and make him too realistic or like play around with things on that way. So that was a really smart choice by them, because that made it really easy to sort of slip into the world. I do think maybe Anders was going to talk about the music.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention.
I actually wish that they had just had the straight music at times and not like a different
orchestral
version.
versions. Yeah. I think that when you talked about atmosphere in the Mario games, I think music plays a big role in it.
Yeah.
Even if the simple stuff. I mean, I'm one of those strange people that would listen to like the select file screen from Mario 64 on loop for like hours. But that's another conversation about amazing video game music YouTube streams. But that takes patience. That's time too, right? It's the ability.
Well, and they assume that children have no patience,
right? And this is actually why John Wick works. If I go back to John Wick, works as like more of a video game movie, because it gives itself the time for repetition to start to.
It's patient.
No longer just it's like if you repeat it enough, like you've moved to the next level of like what repetition means in that way, right? So yeah, I wish the movie was a little more patient. I wish it was a little more. It was fine for Mario. Makes me a little bit worried about what Nintendo's going to do with Legend of Zelda, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
If they do Zelda, it cannot be glib. We cannot have a glib Zelda.
No, you got to be like hand-drawn animation, or like cel-shaded 3D. Yeah.
That's the thing I was going to say, is that I actually don't know if Mario is like capable of a good movie.
No,
like I just don't know if it
should be.
No,
like,
I would lean even deeper into the goofiness. Like I would like go like 1920s,
I agree.
Looney Tunes and like
what
Tex
I'm saying
Avery.
Is that I don't entirely blame them for being glib, where it's like it's Mario. It's not. I kind of wish they'd just gotten rid of the backstory and you didn't have any of that emotional baggage at all. That's more my issue. It's
well, that's what I find.
It's just
glib.
like
it's fake attempts at stuff.
No, I get that. It's performing the what's expected of a children's film in 2023. It's just like if they end up doing a Zelda movie, which I'm sure they will, that has to be treated with a an appropriate seriousness to the way that the games are, because the games are only getting more serious.
Yeah, they should partner with Ghibli instead of Illumination.
That would be the dream.
No, exactly. That's the kind of thing, is like you have to be appropriate to that story. And one last comment is the other Nintendo movie of recent years that I actually wish this was a little bit more of like is Detective Pikachu. Yeah. And the thing with Detective Pikachu is that it's so confident in the inventiveness of Pokemon in and of themselves that it does something completely different. Yeah. Like it's not interested in giving you a Ash Ketchum movie or something, right?
It's actually like literally a world with a weird detective story set in a world with Pokemon. And part of the joy of that is just seeing like 3D, animated versions of Pokemon living in a cool city, because Rhyme City is like awesome design. Yeah, I'm with you. I like Detective Pikachu a lot.
Yeah, but the more time since Detective Pikachu, the more I'm like, I actually like the film's irreverence towards the very topic, but it like nails all the specifics, and then it's like we can just do whatever story we want.
But I don't think we should give up the possibility though that a film based on like essentially children's entertainment that's silly, is fundamentally silly, has to be like treated like last couple of years I watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit again.
Get this straight, meatball. I don't work for tones.
Which is literally mining like cartoons of the 30s and 40s, and I'm just like stunned how good of a job they do in that movie, both preserving the inherent goofiness and ridiculousness of like Looney Tunes and Silly Symphonies and Merry Melodies and all those things, with like an actual movie that has real stakes and things. It's kind of a miracle, honestly. I'm not really sure how you'd do it with the video game thing, because I think then you would, the temptation would be to do something like, I don't know, like Free Guy or something like that. But
Detective Pikachu kind of
is the closest
Roger
thing
Rabbit,
to that, yeah.
Because it's the real life and the
mystery thing too,
the Pokemon, right?
Yep.
So. Yeah, but again, I don't really hold anything against Super Mario Bros. Movie. I think it's completely fine. Like, and I don't. But people who get weirdly upset about it online, I think need to.
Yeah, let's take a.
The fact that we talk 15 minutes on it because we all saw it and it's the really big movie. But if you are like somehow going to see this movie and you're like angry about Chris Pratt being Mario, and you're like a cinephile, it's just like, why are you going to see this? Like, just don't go see it. If you don't have a kid or you think it's just stupid, you're not beholden to anything.
I
just calm down.
So this is a year of like, video game adaptations, with like The Last of Us being like the biggest TV show of the year, the biggest movie right now, Super Mario. I kind of wish both these, which are very different genre, audience, all that sort of stuff, like you couldn't get further. But
they're still about mushrooms, right?
You're right. There's a fungal connection between Mario and The Last of Us.
And a hero with a mustache.
Year of the fungus.
Remember, SNL did the Super Mario Bros. With Pedro Pascal.
That's funny. Okay, they all need to take some notes from James Cameron in the Avatar movies for how to create the feeling of like a secondary world on a movie screen and put people into that atmosphere and let them inhabit it. And neither of these works do that, I think, well at all. And I think that if you could do that, you'd achieve like something more that would be doing something really interesting. And I don't know, like, obviously there's a lot of differences to how you tell a story in a movie and how you tell it in a video game. But I think even if you look at the way that John Wick leans into, I guess Anders said it's patient with the repetitions. I actually think there's something interesting to be done within cinema at this intersection point, and people need to not worry about other things in some of these video game adaptations.
Tell them all. Whoever comes, whoever it is, I'll kill them. I'll kill them all. Of course you will.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode of Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.